Battleboarding is probably one of the oldest pastimes in fandom. The question of who would win the fight has been a subject of entertainment for years, from Deadliest Warrior to Animal Face-Off, and now Death Battle. Sure, Death Battle is by no means the first show to do it. Hell, Spoon One of Channel Awesome did the nerd version of Deadliest Warrior before Screw Attack. But it's probably the biggest one in modern day, with a large fandom behind it that has produced numerous fan arts and even memes that have somehow gotten big enough to breach the fandom. Now, something that may surprise you is that Death Battle has a pretty long running fanfiction community. Yes, I'm serious, and I'm not talking about versus shows that are clearly inspired by it, like Fan Battle, Vault Gaming's Debate Club, Crossover X, or if you're really old school, Fatal Fiction. No, I'm talking about written fanfics. Now, if you're an outsider looking in, you're probably wondering, Death Battle has fanfictions? And if you're a person who spends too much time reading fanfics, you're probably wondering why you've never stumbled upon them during your time browsing for your next fix of yaoi cocaine. You know who you are. To answer the first question, yeah, is it any surprise? Death Battle is in and of itself fan fiction built around the idea of dream matches, and every fan of the series has dream matches they want to see. So, is it any surprise that people want to write down the fights they want to see? Hell, I've written my share. To answer the second question, it's because you're looking in the wrong place. Sure, you may find some Death Battle fan fictions in your typical places like Archive of Our Own, fanfiction.net, or Wattpad, but they're rare. They do exist, but that's not where you'll find the brunt of them. There are specific sites you gotta go to find them. And today, ladies and gentlemen, I'm gonna take you for a trip down the rabbit hole that I called my den for many years. Welcome to the weird and wacky world of Death Battle fanfictions. The first and arguably most popular place for DB fanfics is a Death Battle Fanon on Fandom Wiki. Now, Death Battle Fanon is fucking old, like almost as old as Death Battle itself, being created in 2013 and still going strong to this day. But if you've been in the Death Battle community, you're also familiar with Fanon's somewhat notorious reputation. It's been a long running joke on the community that if you click on the jump to random page, you'll come across the most random of matchups on there. Like look at some of this shit. Jason Voorhees versus Jiren, Springtrap versus Pickle Rick. Oh, that won a Fanon Award. Hannibal Lecter versus Inspector Gadget. Mario versus Ragnar the Blood Age. Persona Joker versus Walter White. This one never finished. Sans versus fucking everyone. Word Girl versus Brightburn. And you'll never guess how long this fight is. It's a whopping 57,000 words, making it one of the longest fights on the wiki. For reference, a book needs to be about roughly 40,000 words to be considered a novel. Then we have SMG4 versus Quote, which was made in 2015, believe it or not, so the overlap between both fandoms is pretty fucking old. Let's see. Melanie's versus Venom? Okay, so Death Battle's already fanfiction. Fanon is a fanfiction of that. SMG4 counts as fanfiction, and Melanis being a fanfiction version of an SMG4 character, so we got a fanfiction of a fanfiction of a fanfiction of a fanfiction here. Fucking layers. And let's see, what else we got? Percy Jackson versus... Who the fuck is this? You see that there is an OC, not from any particular fanfic. It was one specifically made by the creator of the fight. Back in ye olden days of yore, Fanon actually had several fights featuring original characters, and Eden over here is one of the first of many. You know how shippers ship their OCs with canon characters? It's kind of like that, but with fighting. For years, the existence of OCs wasn't really a problem. Hell, 2 OC fights actually won the Fanon Awards, which is basically the Oscars of the community. The most prominent one on Fanon was one called Akihiro Draco Scale, who had like over a dozen fights. Now, for a while, original characters were allowed on the wiki, the only requirement being that they passed the Mary Sue litmus test. However, as years began to pass, it sort of festered. More and more garbage pages of OCs began filling the wiki, and characters who had zero fights or even anything interesting to talk about were multiplying like rabbits. One I remember in particular was when a kid was pitching a character he called Venomzilla, and I found it the funniest thing ever because it was just a picture of Godzilla edited to look like he had the Venom symbiote. He kept going about how overpowered this character was, and I can just imagine the reaction of the mods reading it all and trying to find the nicest way to critique the work of a child. Eventually, the mods had enough and they tightened their restrictions on original character rules. And nowadays, OCs are only allowed if they have some story attached to them, like a web novel. Almost all pages relating to OCs were either deleted or they were moved to blogs. Akihiro, on the other hand, disappeared entirely, not because of the mods, funnily enough. He had his own web series about him called The Dragon King's Son, so he was safe. It was actually the creator that deleted everything relating to him, something about starting anew. So he deleted everything, including the fight that won a Fanon Award. And now, you'd be hard-pressed to find any evidence of this character's existence. And for me, I just find that insane, because there was a lot of work relating to the character, and just deleting it all seemed kind of crazy to me. Fortunately, I was able to find a fight featuring Akihiro on the Wayback Machine, and it was actually the one that won the Fanon Award, and I will put that in the description. Anyway, so with the Legion of OCs purged, Eden, being one of the first OCs on Fanon, is also one of the last remaining ones that still has his own page on the wiki, completely unharmed, since he was created for a web novel, acting as some kind of weird last remnant of a forgotten age. But the next kind of fight I'm going to talk about is a little less innocent, and I'm going to give you a bit of a warning. It's some rather uncomfortable subject matter. We're going to be talking about
rape and murder, rape and beating, rape and something else, and sometimes just immediate killing.
Probably the weirdest genre of fights on the wiki is hentai fights. Yes, plural. And I am not kidding, there are actually fights featuring characters from hentai. Most of them are Monster Girl Quest. We got Aang versus Luca, the kid who routinely gets molested by monster girls. Jesus Christ. The fucking Reggies from Pokemon versus the Nextals. And what I find funny is that one of the advantages the Reggies have in this fight is their inability to have sex. So you see, one of the dolls, their gimmick is she can't fight, so what she does is that she rapes any nearby males, which allows her to immediately give birth to monsters who will fight in her stead. But, well, the issue is the Reggies have no sex or reproductive organs. Never in my life did I think immunity to rape would be an advantage in a fight.
Defiant statement. There is nothing you can do to me. Do your worst. Revolting.
But probably the funniest one is Alice versus Joella from the Monster Girl Encyclopedia. Not because of the fight itself or anything, it's the comments section. These people are getting heated over hentai fights, going, "You're wrong because blah, blah, blah." Just look at this. Okay, just look at this shit, man.
The characters were poorly researched here. Original trilogy Alice would zealous dump Joella into nothingness. Paradox Alice would be down immune to absolutely anything Joella has in her arsenal due to a combination of statements, feats, and cosmology scaling. A fair comparison would be Joella versus low to mid-tier angels from original trilogy, because Luca's companions and allies reach multiversal levels of power in the original trilogy. Paradox is just downright a feel-like Turtle Stompward in every single regard, because Alice has powers that compare to at least a very small fraction of the power of the Father of Chaos, aka Ultimate Luca, who's basically God himself in MGQ.
Multiversal hentai monsters. Christ, what is this community? And you see that data? This comic was made in 2022. You know when this fight was written? 2015, a whole 7 years prior, and this guy's still mad. And then this next motherfucker, he's bringing up the receipts. He's going to debunk this fight in detail about hentai.
If we take the status of Alice's boss fight in Hades from Paradox, and no reason why we shouldn't, as she is an exact copy of Main Paradox, we will see she is immune to all status effects. This includes seduction, trance, horny, climax, and incontinence, meaning any form of charm magic is useless against her. This is the most solid evidence we have to measure her resistance to being instantly charmed by Joella, which is the backbone of her winning. So even if you want to make the argument of Joelle's charm magic is at another level, it's not so much where Alice couldn't resist on some levels. Now pleasure damage. She takes as normal, but that's in an attempt to compete her stamina, not so much having her bent to Joelle's will instantly. Sorry to say, but you banked so much that Joella being able to entrance her so easily based on how she could in MG universe, when she have never been seen to use such abilities on someone at Alice's level. While we know Alice can throw down and handily defeat the most powerful monsters in her world with raw power, maybe not an easy win for Alice, but a win nonetheless. P.S. Monster nature in MGQ is their nature to rape men, not necessarily fall into lust. If anything, if her charm attack did take advantage of Alice's monster nature, it would only fuel Alice to start using her pleasure attacks and rape Cruella, not only have her fall to her whims, but again, we have already established Alice is immune to charm and sexual statuses.
Of course, my rape monster beats up your rape monster. And you want to know the best part? If you check on the page's history, you'll find a version of it edited by the same guy who made this comment, made a whole 5 years later. And it's just the whole fight completely deleted. The man was so petty about a 10-year-old fight, he decided to delete it. Jesus Christ, this is just basement dweller behavior.
You should take a bath. You know they have showers here.
Now, there are more Monster Girl Quest fights out there, but a lot of them got deleted. One in particular was Alma versus Morgan from Darkstalkers, and I actually read this one back in the day, and let me tell you something. They did not shy away from using the more, freaky abilities. Weird snake hand pleasure technique, if I remember correctly. Another that got deleted was Rance versus Kiryu from Redo of Healer, and if you know anything about these two, I think you can get the theme. Now, this discussion has probably left a bad taste in your mouth, so how about a bit of a palate cleanser? Something I enjoy about Fanon are the weird little quirks you find with certain writers, specifically on how they write the hosts. Now, roughly 3/4 of writers use Wiz and Boomstick as hosts for their fights. And at times you notice these little differences on how they portray Wiz and Boomstick. For example, Obsidian Crusader emphasizes Wiz's pathetic nerd aspect, as well as a guy having little self-worth. And having interacted with the writer himself, part of me thinks that he just projects his own self-image on the guy. And then there's Hypersonic, whose depiction of Boomstick uses internet lingo rather frequently, which ironically predicted how Death Battle writes Boomstick nowadays. Now, the remaining fourth is where you get the sillier ones. Sometimes you get original hosts, the not whizzes and not boomsticks. Or sometimes you get pre-existing characters taking over as hosts. Sometimes you have characters you have no business being in the same room together, like Gogeta and Zenogre. How the hell did you get them to fit in the room? More importantly, how did you teach the wolf dragon to speak English? Other times, you get rotating hosts that change depending on the fight, like the writer I'm Linda using Velma from Scooby-Doo and Adam Spengler from the Ghostbusters when covering a Halloween episode, which, makes sense thematically, and I actually do like the idea of alternating hosts depending on the fight. Probably my favorite is Go Commit Die using Patchy the Pirate and Potty the Parrot as his hosts. Because by some weird string of logic, it makes sense, okay? Think about it. Wiz and Boomstick play a role similar to anthology or TV show hosts like The Crypt Keeper or Cousin Eerie, or even to a lesser extent Elvira, the Mistress of Dark. Somebody to provide entertainment before the show starts properly. Patchy and Potty are like that, but instead of horror or arena battles, it's children's cartoons and commercials. And considering Go Commit Die covered a lot of cartoons in his fights, Patchy actually works. So by some fucked up logic, it actually makes sense. It shouldn't, but it does. But not everybody used pre-existing characters. A lot of them tended to create their own hosts, and I'm going to be honest, these guys are like hit or miss. Some of them lack any notable personality or quirks that make them distinct enough from Wiz and Boomstick. And honestly, I can just attribute this to inexperience. Because, they're working with a blank slate as opposed to guidelines, so it's pretty hard to make a host do more than just spew out information. And when they develop personalities, they feel very derivative of Wiz and Boomstick with slight tweaks to their personality. But there was one writer whose hosts were very distinct. In fact, you couldn't help but notice those OCs. Not just because of their personality being distinct enough from Wiz and Boomstick, but because there's lore. Before the episode even starts and after it ends, there are these little skits, which I can best describe as fan-made slice-of-life webcomic comedy with tons of video game and anime references, with the humor of BlazBlue skits and the ever-escalating insanity of professional wrestling. That being the writer, Nobody Cipher. I think a good example of what I'm talking about is the structure of Organization XVX and how they handle it, where it's structured into 3 segments. The first one is like a funny little skit with maybe a bit of lore, then the second is the actual fight. Then, after that, the third one is just the same as the first one. And I'm going to be honest, the whole plot line is very funny to me. Let me give you just a bit of a summary, okay? Because I think it's hilarious. Episode 1, Wiz and Boomstick hire 2 people to take over as hosts while they go on vacation. The substitutes are Nova, a self-proclaimed super genius whose culinary skills, or lack thereof, are considered chemical warfare, and Theodore, a guy who fancies himself as a sort of gentleman hero of justice. He might also be a defense attorney. Episode 2 and 3, Theo almost dies because of Nova's cooking and is revived by a new host, Alice, who is a human-hating robot. Also, a dead body gets found in Boomstick's apartment, and he is arrested for murder. Episode 4, instead of using Theo's attorney skills to get Boomstick out of prison, Nova calls in a favor from a politician in Last Station from Hyperdimension Neptunia, and assembles an army of pretties from Disgaea to search evidence of Boomstick's innocence in an LA Comic-Con, which leads to the pretties having an all-out war against the Raving Rabbits. This fight is also a pseudo-sequel to a 1-minute melee fight by the same writer, where in the very same Comic-Con, Deadpool and Gilgamesh from Final Fantasy were having an all-out brawl. The plot point of Boomstick being in jail seems to be forgotten. Episode 5 seems to be a parody of Fire Emblem Fates, where one of the hosts is put in a position where they have to pick a faction, though instead of having to choose between their biological family and their adoptive family, instead we have Ruby Rose trying to bribe them with cookies and coffee, and on the other hand, we have Yuki Terumi from BlazBlue writing the worst pitch ever to get people to join his side. Velvetoris from Disgaea shows up from nowhere presenting a third faction, but ends up going on a tangent about the health values of tea and coffee. We also get introduced to a new host, Lufer, a womanizer who has really bad luck. Episode 6 and 7, anti-death battle protests happen outside of HQ, and the hosts have to find a way to stall them. Lufer gets hit with a Rolls Rollada on his way to work, and later incurs the wrath of Sega to Sanshiro by refusing to play the Sega Saturn. The hosts later sick Segata on the protesters, saying they didn't play the Sega Saturn. Episode 8, the protesters avoid Segata's wrath by carrying fake Sega Saturns, like the Angel of Death scene from Prince of Egypt. This is also where we get a mention of another host, Rena. The guys also have to deal with giant cockroach infestations. Episode 9, we get a hold of the Death Note, and the hosts are trying to get information out of the protesters' data so they can use it on them. Episode 10, El Dante from DMC Reboot fights Noir from Hyperdimension Neptunia. And as a guest star, we get Dante from the Devil May Cry series as a co-host, and Theodore has an "oh my god, Dante senpai" moment. Skipping ahead a bit, we formally get introduced to Rena, a crazy bitch with multiple personality disorder, meaning we technically get 5 hosts now. We get more instances of the cast fighting off an angry crowd of protesters with Lufer getting hurt, and suddenly people remember, oh wait, our boss Boomstick is on trial, and Theo says, yeah, but I need to practice my objection technique. And the Boomstick plotline is promptly dropped again. As we go on, skits become more and more infrequent, but the last one is in the penultimate episode. The leader of the Prinnies asks for his paycheck for the team investigations he did prior, only to find out he's being replaced by Bandana Day, and the battle is basically them scrapping over their job position in Bowser's Castle, which is riddled with death traps. This is like the last skit, really, so it's likely in this continuity Boomstick is rotting in a prison cell somewhere. Now, I know it sounds like I'm making fun of Fanon, and to an extent that is true, but I'm just hyper focusing on the more weird and bizarre aspects for the sake of entertaining. As someone who grew up reading this stuff and was even involved in a writing sphere for a brief amount of time, I can say that you would find a very genuine community that had people that were united by their shared passion. There were plenty of collaborations between writers with more than one person working on a fight, and during the early 2020s, there was a trend of fights leading to the combatants jumping across dimensions and interrupting the fights written by other people. Axe Cop versus Rick Sanchez is an early example of this. There were some fights that actually featured the writers themselves making cameos. Travis Bickle versus the Driver had some people who were friends of the writer appear as mobsters who were gunned down by Travis at the start of the fight. Similarly, Light Yagami versus Columbo, the writers cameo as victims of Kira, a lot of them dying in increasingly comedic ways. One of the funnier examples is FNAF Pro's Whiteface versus Monica fight, which a bunch of the writers just tag up and attack the fighters, and they all die horribly. There's even kind of a joke in the fight itself. What I'm trying to illustrate here is that most of the people in fandom were just there for fun, and they had fun, and they would form friendships there. We were all just there for a good time, and we all just wanted to share our work and include other people's stuff in it. And one fight that I think is very representative of that idea is the now deleted battle of Guts versus Wolf from Sekiro. You see, back in 2024, there was a user who went by the name of WebSurferJohn who had a pretty good standing in the community. People liked him, and he was best friends with Hypersonic, who was one of the most prolific writers on Fanon. But, for a while he stopped posting, and people got worried. And then an account posted on Fanon claimed to be John's girlfriend, and she revealed to the community that John fucking died. Now, unsurprisingly, this news sent ripples throughout the community, and naturally people came together to mourn him. Hyper, as a way of paying tribute to his old friend, decided to actually write Wolf vs. Guts, and tons of people decided to contribute to it, either making thumbnails or art for the fight. And days of hard work, Hyper pushed himself to finishing the fight, and finally, it was done. Wolf vs. Guts was complete. Only for WebSurferJohn to come back. No, this wasn't a ghost. This was John himself. And, okay, you know how I said John died? Well, I lied. And so did his ex-girlfriend. Long story short, John was taking a break from the internet. He was sick or something. And his girlfriend, who cheated on him and was later dumped, decided to partake in a bit of devious behavior and log into his account and claim he was dead, with the intent of laundering money from his grieving friends by starting a GoFundMe for a fake funeral. The only reason she didn't go fully through with the plan was just boredom. Not any moral reason or conscience. She just got bored, which makes me wonder, how the fuck did she and John get together in the first place?
Women.
Now, I think it's time we move on from Fanon and go into the Wild West. The other prominent website for mortal altercations is DeviantArt. Now, while I may have had much to say about Fanon and its little quirks as well as its community, I don't have as much to say about DeviantArt. Not because there isn't much to say, just that it kind of occupies a blind spot in my knowledge since I read more of the Fanon wiki. It's also unfortunately kind of dead at the moment. Now, I'm not quite sure on the exact details, but basically, a few years ago, DeviantArt updated the website, which nuked the stash feature from orbit, and the resulting fallout mutated any literature on it to the point where it's just kind of painful to look at. I mean, look at this shit, man. Look at it! It's hard to read. So, with a dead community, borderline unreadable fights, I couldn't give you anything detailed on the writings of DeviantArt's history, as well as any funny dramas. Really, the only thing I know about the Death Battle DeviantArt community is the fact that Just a Robot was apparently a part of it, just under a different name. But it's funny to see what became of some writers years later. One does like fetish art of blow-up sex dolls, which is one hell of a shift in content. The other big difference between DeviantArt and Fanon is ethics. Yeah, now, believe it or not, Fanon does have rules, and generally, fights that break those rules are deleted. And though we did see some egregious stuff there, that's just because there's so much shit that there ends up being a lot of it slipping through the cracks. DeviantArt, on the other hand, has no such restrictions. There are no cracks. It's a floodgate, and it's open at all times. The only thing limiting the kind of fights that you can write is your imagination and your morality. And I think no other writer embodies this better than Insti. Now, this man may seem like a normal death battle writer, but in reality, he's insane. No morals, no boundaries. There is no line he will not cross. We're not just dealing with ordinary battles. We're talking about stuff most people in the community would never touch with a 10-foot pole. Shaq versus 50 Cent. Chris Chan versus Ebony Darkness Dementia Ravenway. And yes, the thing at the thumbnail. He wrote a battle pitting the Columbine shooters against Dylan Roof, a Nazi who shot up a church. And the thing does not go where you think it does. It's not just a fight, it's a weird mix of political satire, horror story with oddly detailed descriptions of a school shooting and also an erotica. Like, you know it's going to be good when the first line you read is an excerpt from the Bible and you're greeted with this image. Look at this, man. It's gorgeous. And the funniest part is that this was the final battle he ever worked on. This was his swan song. And so, what has the guy done since, really? What has Insti done since the battle? Oh, I see. Godspeed, you crazy bastard. Well, that's about it for the video. I've said all I wanted to say. Now, I don't want you guys to get the wrong idea. Yes, I've been ragging on a lot of these Death Battle fanfics throughout the video, but I am sincere when I say I love this side of the internet, and I hope this video at the very least exposed you to a hobby I enjoyed growing up. And if any of you are interested in reading some fights for yourselves, I'll link some in the description. Sure, some of these matchups may seem a bit weird, and you may find the research questionable, but these writers operate on the idea of spinning straw into gold, and I hope that you grow to enjoy this hobby much the same as I have. Anyway, this is Carson. I hope you enjoyed this video, and until next time, have a nice day. Ciao.